Howdy, all you delicious people. I'm here today to review the 100 Candles Game movie. This film, to me, is just another horror variety film that we have seemingly people wanting to tell ghost stories to one another, and in between that, we end up having some Bloody Mary situations and consistently these people more and more longer that we go along with this game, the more people get more and more terrified, scared, and whatever. Going into this, there is some scenes here that are actually pretty decent. Like, I do actually go like, oh, hey, this is kind of an interesting way to do a film and do certain scenes. Like the Amy Smart story is actually kind of interesting. We also have one story in the kind of very beginning that I thought, I'm like, oh, this is kind of interesting. But also, these stories also feel very reminiscent to other films that I've seen at some point in time. Really saying that some of the scenes here could feel like the movie The Fog, or could feel like The Exorcist, or could feel like The Shining, or any number of movies that people might be familiar with. And this could feel like a copy and paste job for most of this film. Here is something that I have to tell people before you are to go and try this film on for size and see what it's about. There are two scenes in this movie that I think were kind of like disappointing for this film. There is one scene that basically you have to watch this film in the pitch black darkness because you can't actually see what's going on in one film whatsoever. There's a scene with an old lady that is kind of rummaging through her house to check up on some noises, and you can't really see a lick of what's going on throughout this entire scene. I tried to I was in a room that had some like glare on my tablet, so I had to like try to consistently try to adjust and find the right spot in my home to be able to just watch this scene. So I could be able to just like, oh, okay, I get what's going on. Like, I had to consistently go back and start to replay scenes just so I can like see what the heck is going on, because I couldn't see at all what was going on during a certain scene. Also, there is an entire scene in this movie that is completely and utterly done in Spanish. So hopefully you get a good version that has subtitles in this movie, or you just go into a certain app that has subtitles for this movie, or you will be very much just going along and just be like, well, like, I guess I just can't watch this scene that is in this movie because it is done in Spanish, where everything else is done in English. So that was just kind of a disappointing scene to just be like, well, I guess I'm just gonna like watch this with no subtitles and just go like, okay, all right, I can't wait till this scene is to be over. Uh, Really, it's like, to me, that scene also was just another kind of copy and paste of another film that I am fairly familiar of. Really, depending on when this movie actually came out, which I'm assuming it came out fairly recently. Like, yeah, there's a lot of things here that are just reminiscent of other films, like the Ryan Reynolds film Buried, and so on and so forth. There's a lot of movies that are just like movies I've already seen. Really, this movie was a variety horror film that really just comes down to, there is better horror variety films out there. Some people may not even know they exist. Really, a movie like the Seth Green movie Holidays, or an interesting film like Burning Palms, or Trick or Treat, which actually has every single story like interconnect with one another, whereas this movie doesn't actually interconnect with any of the stories whatsoever. It's not like the same monster is in every single story. It's basically just a bunch of random ghost stories that Some of them are better than others. Really, I do like the Amy Smart story about the mother and daughter situation. I do like that story. I also like the boy and or the man and his son story, which eventually I'll talk about in spoilers. With that said, yeah, this movie is honestly so seemingly underground or unknown to where it seems like I wasn't even able to get a cast list of this movie. Like, I know this girl's name is Erica, but other than that, I don't know anyone else's name. If you go and check IMDb, you'll just see that there was a actor's name list, and that was about it. I guess no one else really legitimately had a name in this movie. So that is going to be very creative for me to talk about this movie in spoilers. So I'll try to like skirt around and try to figure out how to talk about these characters without really actually knowing any of their names or being able to hopefully remember all of this. So with that said, I think it's time to do that double five time territory because I think it's about that time to go into spoilers. Really, for some people that have never seen, here's my conclusion. For those of you that haven't seen movies like The Midnight Man, like creepy pasta-ish like things, and also like Are You Afraid of the Dark? Like, we have this movie being very reminiscent or very familiar to Are You Afraid of the Dark? Having a bunch of people sitting around in a bunch of candles all telling ghost stories. Very reminiscent to, I guess, Are You Afraid of the Dark? But they tried to change it and try to uh, make this movie look visually interesting. Here's my thing. I was so worried while this movie was being filmed that this place that they were in, I was scared that eventually these people were going to burn down their set, was going to burn down their environment. I'm like, man, I am just waiting for one of these candles to be done burning out to where we have a fire accident somewhere in this movie. Because I'm like, man, how many, like, numerous times do we see just like candles that are like to the ends of their uh lighting like thing. You'll see that once you get into the movie. Like, we have it already to where we start to see like candles that are at the very tail end of their light. So with that said, let's go and light our way to say it is spoiler time. Spoiler time. It's about that time again to spoil this movie. So I do apologize. I will not otherwise be able to have names and whichever. I'll have to just describe people as we go along in this film. So we have Erica, who is to give us the rules and regulations about the 100 Candles game. So we are to have all of these people scramble around to have lit all these candles. Now they are sitting around this circle of candles, and they are to go into a horror story. After their horror story is done, they are to go into a separate room and look at a mirror and see what they see afterwards, and then light their candle out. So with these people, I'm gonna go into the story between the story, and then I'll go into all the side stories. So that way, and then we'll get right back to the very end of what ends up happening to the story between the story. So we eventually have every one of these people eventually telling a story, and so they go into a separate room and then they speak to the mirror usually and then blow out their candle. The more and more that this story eventually escalates, we eventually have I think the blonde-haired girl is to go into the room and eventually see some old lady with a cat, and it scares the crap out of her. I'm like, man, this is kind of like eerie to me. Like, again, like most of this movie, like there might have been a point in time, like there might have been once or twice that I probably did actually legitimately jump in this film, like barely, because I kind of saw them coming, but it was still kind of scary. If anything, this movie probably made me much more uncomfortable than actually like, oh my god, I'm actually legitimately scared. Because really, I've just kind of seen a batch of horror movies, and it kind of just gets to the point where you are seeing the wind up and the pitch of every kind of like, oh, okay, well, if there's going to be a jump scare in this movie, it's going to be here. If there's something that is going to scare the crap out of you, it's going to be right placed in here. You can kind of tell exactly where it's going to be. So we have eventually this old lady with this cat, and we end up just seeing this old lady who just looks all disheveled and just like damaged, and we have a cat that is also like, we have this old lady who looks very zombie-esque, and so does her cat. So we have the blonde girl who yells and screams that she had seen some old lady with some cat, and so we have it to where all the people are trying to calm her, to tell her that it's like, no, it's just like, it's just the game, like it's just scaring you, it's like everything will be okay. So we eventually have these people who are to go into this room, and at points in time they are to eventually see this old lady with this cat and to yell and scream, and eventually go on to try and forcibly continue this game because they're getting more and more scared. To eventually, we consistently have other people that are to see that people are taking quite a long time to be in that room. So some people are going and accompanying the people so that way they can feel a little bit safer or ask if they're okay. So I think that's all good and well enough to like talk about the story in between the stories. So let's get into the actual side stories. So I hope I'm going to do these in order, but I probably will mix and confuse them. But people will get the point. People will get the gist. The very first story is about a girl who is at a seesaw. It seems like there is another girl that approaches, very blonde, and so we end up having another girl who looks kind of like Wednesday from the Addams Family, who is just doing this teeter totter with this girl. And so we are to see this consistent, like, up and down of heads consistently going throughout this scene. I'm like, well, if there's going to be a jump scare, it's probably going to be in here, where you just kind of see the heads going up and down consistently. And then, surefire enough. So we have a blonde little girl that is telling this story about a witch that seems to eat little children, and so we have the Wednesday looking girl, the black haired girl, saying like, well, what would people taste like? What would like? So we eventually have this girl who is to eventually just keep bobbing her head up and down, the blonde girl and the black haired girl, and so we eventually have the blonde-haired girl who ends up turning into a zombified like human, and she is to eventually go and try to attack the black-haired girl. And so we end up just seeing this blonde-haired girl getting shot and killed by some random farmer-esque looking guy. And I'm like, okay, like, so, like, where is this story going? But the story is that this farmer guy and his daughter have been tricking these witch-like people to sucker them in to eventually take these witch-like kids uh, or men or women or whatever. They are to trick and sucker them in to kill them off one by one and eventually just bury them. So evidently, we have the father who's telling him like the whole ordeal of like, yeah, like this is just another one bites the dust kind of thing. And so we end up having the daughter who is asking her father, it's like, well, I wonder what witches taste like. And so really that is just one scene. That is just one whole scene. Like it's just bizarrely like a thing that is just so quick, but then eventually you're like, well, what the heck was that? So we move on. So there is another scene between a boy or a man and his son. It seems that this guy has some kind of cornfield, or he is some kind of farmer of sorts, and we have it to where the father is to consistently tell his son to never go outside, because it seems that the fog people will come for him if he is to go outside. It seems that we have this consistent pattern of monsters wanting to eat children, and so we have this father of this son that is to tell this kid that like, yeah, like if you go outside, you'll get eaten by the fog people. So we have this son that is eventually going and uh, consistently popping his head out of this window, and I'm like, well, here's where the thing is going to happen. I'm like, when is it going to happen? When are you expecting how many numerous times that this kid is going to pop his head out of the window, and then eventually something is going to happen? And surefire enough, the wind up and the pitch. So we have this kid who continues to pop his head out the window. We have this kid who is really just tempted to go and see what is outside because he's very curious, even though it might lead to his death. So we eventually have this father that in one night is seeing these fog monsters that are to approach this home, and we have the father who goes and shoots one of these fog monsters. He stacks himself full of bullets in his gun, and he ends up going out to shoot one of these fog monsters. Then we have the father who is to end up uh, going into his room and eventually taking a bullet to his own head. So we end up having the son who's like, well, like I guess I have to go outside now. Like I guess like if this is gonna be my end, then this is gonna be my end. So we have it to where the son like just bizarrely rubs like this sock like all over his body, I guess to try to eliminate his child odor of sorts, because we have the father who mentions that it seems that these fog monsters like the odor or the uh, or just the to be able to see this kid. So we have the kid who ends up wiping himself down with a sock, I guess, to smell great. So we have the kid who ends up going out of this house to eventually get grabbed by a fog monster. A fog monster that is actually a SWAT person from the FBI. So I guess we end up finding out the real story of this is that this kid had been taken by this man, and the FBI have been trying to get this kid back out of this house. We end up having, I guess, this boy's real parents off to the side who have just been like, oh my god, like, we finally got our son back. We finally got, like, him back to us. And so we end up having this being seemingly a bizarrish happy ending out of this whole thing, that the whole fog monster thing was actually the FBI trying to retrieve this kid from this home. So that bizarrely was a fairly interesting story out of a bulk of this, which I thought was like that was probably the best story. pushing on. So there is seemingly some old lady that is wearing a oxygen-like mask and now having to try to make it through her home. This is a scene that was very hard to see or watch. And plus also, there was nothing really good enough in this scene to really care about what happens anyways. But it is what it is. So we have this old lady who is to hear music going down into her house. So we have the old lady who is trying as much as or as well as possible to make it down to her stairs to turn off this music that had bizarrely come on. We have this old lady who's to go down the stairs to realize there was some kid asking for a thing of water. And so we end up having this old lady who tries to walk back up her stairs, and this kid is to follow her up the stairs with her. We end up also having this old lady, like, having seemingly numerous kids, like one or two kids, following her up the stairs. So we have this old lady who is to eventually fall over and to seemingly barf. And we end up seeing that all of a sudden, down the hallway of where her bed is, we end up having a kid that is there who is taking her oxygen tank and blowing up balloons. And so now this woman no longer has her oxygen tank because her oxygen tank was down the hall. And then also, like, now this kid is blowing up balloons with this oxygen tank. So we eventually have this old woman who is to eventually get scared by one of the children popping up behind her. And so I guess we eventually just have this woman who, without her oxygen and plus also getting scared, she might have either one, had a heart attack and died, or two, this woman must have gotten so terrified that eventually, and plus also, without her oxygen, she just keeled over. So we end up just seeing a demon that appears into the darkness that ends up just dragging this old lady out of frame, and that's just how this story is to finish. So, pushing along, so I'm going to get to the Amy Smart story. So, we have Amy Smart who is sleeping with her daughter, and so we have Amy who is to be sleeping with her daughter, and Amy's to wake up mentioning to her daughter, like, hey, did you, like, wet the bed? Like, what's going on? Katie is to turn on the light and to push down the covers to realize that her daughter is bizarrely bloody and dead. Okay. So we have Amy who is to get up and to run into her daughter's room to see what the heck had happened. And bizarrely, her daughter is back into her bed, alive seemingly, and there is a monster that appears within Amy's daughter's room and is starting to go in and attack Amy's daughter. So we have Amy who ends up scrambling to get some knife and to swing at this monster, and it seems like Amy is defeating this monster. But we also have Amy's daughter being in danger, to where Amy's daughter is to scramble into the bathroom, lock the door to have like Amy like stop almost trying to attack and or kill her, because we have it to where Amy's daughter is to mention, it's like, oh my god, like, you're doing this again, like, you're losing it again. So we have Amy who is bizarrely pulling a Jack Nicholson from The Shining like thing, where we have Amy who is like taking this knife and trying to break open this door, which is a bizarrish visual. But we have Amy who is poking a hole in this door and eventually desperately trying to get into this door to seemingly protect her daughter from some kind of monster. We eventually have Amy who is to eventually uh, go and see a monster that is coming from out of this tub to attack her daughter, and we eventually have Amy, who is to eventually like try and save her daughter from this monster. But eventually this does not work out very well. We eventually have it to where it seems that uh, a person has to die at the fairly end of this, because eventually it just goes into insanity and whatever. But anyways, so yeah, like that's how that story I think just eventually just gets resolved. I don't remember the exact ending of this movie, so if I got it incorrect or whatever. But moving on, because there's a lot of other things to get through. So we have a buried alive story, which I didn't understand because I don't speak Spanish, sadly enough. Like I did have a Spanish speaking class, but a lot of the stuff was just so like I had to like see the writing of it, or I had to like have this girl that is talking way too quickly to where I couldn't understand what the heck was going on. So really the thing that I guess that I could have gotten from this story is we have this girl who is to call her friend to let her know, hey, yeah, I'm buried alive. And so it seems that I think eventually we are to have this friend who is to laugh about uh, what is going on with this girl because she does not believe her. And to eventually, I think towards the end of this story, I think maybe that this girl who is buried alive has something to do with her friend wanting to bury her alive. So I guess like this girl couldn't have called anybody else and like tried to like she couldn't have called 911 or she couldn't have called anywhere else. Like she could only I guess call her friend and that was it. So and plus there was a lot of times where there was like these uh not videos but like audio recordings back and forth from her and her friend like consistently like instead of a texting they were like doing these like audio recordings back and forth to one another bizarrely. So that was just that story where eventually we have the girl who is still just buried alive and that's how that story just goes. So we have another story about a guy who is to basically come as a very much exorcist like story. We have we have a priest that is to go to a woman who is seemingly possessed by the devil. We end up having this priest who is to seemingly dissolve this woman of her devil, but we have this woman who eventually ends up also being pregnant and delivers a child. It seems that this priest ends up collecting this child, and it seems that this priest is like, oh, well, like, this is the demon child. This is the child that, like, that I've wanted and whatever. Like, I guess this is going to be the new devil child or whatever. Like, I'm assuming what ended up happening is that quite possibly the devil impregnated this woman and had delivered a devil's son for, I guess, this priest to collect and have and whatever. Other than that, I think I have most of the stories I think covered. I could be wrong. There could have been a story here or there that I did forget about. But I think that is a bulk of a lot of the stories that I think happened within this movie. If I'm wrong, then I apologize. Maybe otherwise I might go back and like re-talk about this or recover this. Maybe there might be a sequel to this movie. It could be possible, but because you never know. I don't know how many variety things would normally kind of do sequels that you weren't expecting. But yeah, but other than that, I think I did cover everything, and if I'm wrong, then I do apologize. But otherwise, I think that is it. So, we should come to the conclusion of what ends up happening to the story between the story. So, what ends up happening is it seems that I think Erica was, we have like a story that is just not actually a video. Okay, so we have it to where Erica and the group of people are to say one last story. And so Erica is to tell this story about like a mother with a cat and a daughter. It seems that the neighbors really hated this daughter and this mother to the point of like throwing fruit at them and all kinds of things. So we end up having this mother and this daughter being so angry and so outraged at not only their neighborhood, but I guess just themselves and all kinds of things. And eventually we have it to where we have their cat that I guess grows so angry and so whatever that eventually the cat ends up going and killing the mother, and we end up having the daughter who ends up going off to some insane asylum to continue to be angry and rageful and whatever. And really, that is just the bizarre conclusion of that story, I guess. And so I guess we are to assess or assume that probably Erica was the one that was the story out of this. The conclusion out of this is that Erica was that daughter, and she is to come and to perform these 100 Candles games to, I guess, take all of these people, kill them all off, and start this game all over again. Because eventually, what ends up happening at the end of this story is that everybody ends up one by one starting to vanish and I guess be consumed by this game. Uh, so yeah, like that's pretty much what ends up happening with this story, and I think I covered everything. I could be wrong. Really, there might have been some story here or there that wasn't actually that good. But it is what it is with this story. Yeah, I feel good about this review. Hopefully, people will like this review. I don't know. I don't even know how popular this movie really is in all actuality, because you think that a movie might do well, and then you roll the dice, and that's what happens. So I'm going to get out of here. Goodbye, buddy. Bye, everybody.